Hi, this is Dr. Bowman. I want to take a few minutes to provide some information that looks at the history of American law enforcement. Asking the question, for what purposes do criminal justice agencies exist? And I would ask you that question, for what purpose or purposes do your agency exist? I asked the question in the first class, and think about it even more. Think about it again. What is the purpose of your organization, and for what purposes does your organization exist? If we look at the history of American police is based on the English system, the system called the Frank Pledge system, where families bonded together for the protection of one another. Now, here under the Frank Pledge system, families banded together for protection. 10 families banded together. In fact, the men from those families, men and boys, over the age of 11 or 12, they banded together and called themselves a tithing. 10 tithings banded together to form a group of 100 that was supervised by a reeve. These 100 groups banded together to form shires. The shires or communities were supervised by the local supervisor appointed by the governor, called the shire reeve. You notice this word shire reeve is actually the predecessor of today's sheriff. The sheriff, who is the chief law enforcement official in today's counties. Now, looking at 18th century English policing, we see the advent of cities erupting. Cities came into existence during the, as we know them today, during the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries as a result of the Industrial Revolution phenomena. The Industrial Revolution brought factories and jobs into central areas, typically areas where there was transportation available by a waterway. And so if you look at most of the major American cities today, or most major cities in the world, they're located on a waterway. The preeminent means of transportation during this time was shipping. And so being located on a waterway was truly a shipping advantage and allowed factories to be built and constructed, and workers, because the primary mode of transportation was foot, maybe some horses if people had the wealth and the wherewithal to do it, but primarily foot. And so people had to relocate from the rural areas, from farm and from agricultural bases, into these newly created or created and growing cities and metropolises all over the world. And in 18th century England, London's population increased, and along with the population increase, they witnessed this new phenomenon called crime. Never before had crime existed as they began to see it in the 1700s in England. So much of a problem that by 1829, Sir Robert Peel, the British Home Secretary, was ordered to create a force of police officers. Peel created the London Metropolitan Police, a police force of 1,000 men called bobbies. We're not sure if bobbies were because his name was Robert or Bob Peel, or if bobbies were the name because of the makeup of the badges and the uniforms at that time. However, they were called bobbies, and that force was created in 1829 by virtue of the Metropolitan Police Act of 1829. Now, if you look at some of the fundamental principles of the Metropolitan Police Act, it was the London Metropolitan Police was the first modern police force established by Sir Robert Peel, arguably the father of modern policing, since the London Metropolitan Police Force was the first modern police force. You look at some of the principles here of the London Metropolitan Police, and you see that that according to Peel, the force must be organized along military lines. Police administrators and officers must be under government control. Emphasis placed on hiring qualified persons and training them properly. That new police officers must complete a probationary period. If they fail to meet standards during this time, then they will not be hired as permanent officers. That police personnel should be assigned to specific areas of the city for a specific time period. Police headquarters must be centrally located in the city. And please key on this word centrally located because this concept of a central headquarters is really key to our understanding of bureaucratic organizations. That 7, police officers must maintain proper appearances at all times in order to gain and keep the respect of citizens. 8, individual police officers should be able to control their temper and refrain from violence whenever possible, and police records must be kept in order to measure police effectiveness. And this is courtesy of Cengage Learning from 2008. So we see here this London Metropolitan Police Force, a force that was created almost 200 years ago with these and several additional guiding principles. If you look at that police force established 187 years ago or thereabout, and you look at police departments today, they look very much the same. The structure is largely the same. The function and the philosophies and the operational principles largely the same as those established under the first modern police force by Sir Robert Peel in 1829. So if you look at this document and these principles of policing that are almost 200 years old, you have to ask the question and you have to wonder just how far really have police and has policing come in the last 200 years since its creation. Under colonial times in the Americas, shortly after the creation of the London Metropolitan Police, American police departments started to pop up. Police departments in the United States mirrored the English system. They were initially led by citizens and then constables and night watchmen. It was kind of funny because there was a period of time where the police officers or those who were responsible for policing and security in different cities, the night watchmen were people who were arrested and they had to serve their term out acting as night watchmen over cities. Now that's a little bit ironic. They were not paid and oftentimes they were arrested for stealing, and their job was to watch the city and watch the town during the night. But in the 19th century, Boston became the first city with a police department in America in 1838. Shortly after that, New York City followed suit, and New York City set the foundation for modern policing. New York cops were the first to be uniformed, although they argue with Philadelphia over that. But still, New York City sets the foundation for the first modern police departments. Now, there have been in the United States 3 different eras of policing: the political era, the reform era, and the community policing era. The political era existed largely from the time policing was implemented in the United States through about 1930. This system under political policing was called the patronage system or the spoils system. The patronage system because politicians largely were in charge of police departments, and politicians determined what police departments did, and they had a huge say in how police departments were run. As a result of the political influence and the political oversight and direction of police departments, bribery and political corruption were the hallmarks of the era. In fact, very often politicians would use the police to enforce the law against their enemies. Police were used to arrest people who were going to going to the polls to vote for political opponents of the politician in charge. Police at the same time were used to license everything from prostitutions and prostitutes to illegal drug houses, gambling, etc., etc. So during this political era of policing, policing was extremely corrupt. So corrupt that eventually Americans called for reforming the police. The era of reform started around 1930, although arguably we see indications that even as early as 1883, with the Pendleton Act, also referred to as the Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, there was initial efforts to reduce the influence of politics in policing and politics in federal and local governments. So during this reform era of policing, this era lasting from approximately 1930 to 1980, we saw increased police professionalism. We witnessed during that era these architects of modern American policing, architects like former Berkeley, California Chief August Vollmer, former Chicago Police Superintendent O.W. Wilson, or also some of the architects of what we know as the professional model of policing. This model of policing that made policing and police departments very mechanistic, let me say, not touchy-feely, not human interactive, but instead very much just the facts, just operating based on numbers. This is where the professional model or the reform model, or primarily what we know about the responsibilities of police officers and police departments today, came about during this reform era. Policing started to identify their mission as being crime control. And it was during this era where rapid response to calls became the primary way of dealing with crime. Rapid response and retrospective investigations responding to crimes after crimes occurred. And this whole reactive mode of policing is a vestige of the professional or reform era of policing. But there were administrative reforms during this era. But then in the 50s and 60s, as the civil rights era and drugs and hippies started to come onto the scene of the Americas, there was a lot of turmoil and crime started to spiral out of control. There was a huge amount of dissatisfaction with police who had identified themselves as crime fighters, waging a war on crime, yet crime was out of control. That led to a push in the 70s and then 80s for a new kind of policing. That brought us into the modern era of community policing, or the community era of policing. The community era started around 1980 and arguably continues today. The emphasis being on good police-community relationships and proactive police efforts versus reactive efforts have become the hallmarks of community policing. We see a lot of problem solving and problem-oriented policing associated with community policing. But the key word here is the focus on proactive methods, prevention versus reaction. Prevention, preventative type methods, a preventative posture, and partnering with communities and community groups and businesses to or to jointly fight crime is the primary vestige of the community era of policing. We look here then at a summary of some of the strengths and weaknesses of these three eras of policing, the political era, the reform era, and the community era. I'll leave this up for you guys to take a look at, and you can always go back or come back to this and look at it if you want to review this video again. Now, looking at law enforcement agencies today in the United States, there are over 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the U.S., employing somewhere between 750,000 and a million police officers and personnel. Now, there are roughly 3,088 sheriff's departments, over 1,300 special police agencies, 49 state police agencies, and 50 federal law enforcement agencies. The biggest sector of law enforcement agencies is the local sector. In the municipal and county law enforcement agencies, most police officers, in fact, work in small and medium-sized departments, typically 10 or fewer officers. So while New York City has the largest police department with more than 40,000 employees, there are at the same time about 680 small towns with just one police officer. So there are a lot of small police agencies in the United States. Municipal agencies have the broadest authority to apprehend criminal suspects, to maintain order, and to provide services to the community. We look at from the municipal level, the next step up on the local side are the sheriffs and county law enforcement. Every county in the U.S., except those in Alaska, has a sheriff, with the largest being LA County, with 8,400 employees, but the smallest sheriff's department have just one employee. The primary responsibility of the sheriff's office is to investigate violent crime in the county, but they also run jails. They serve eviction and court summonses. They keep order in courthouses, collect taxes, and enforce orders of the court as well, orders such as jury sequestration. We look here at this graphic. It shows the function of sheriffs and local police departments, and we see while in the light green the responsibilities of the sheriff's departments, and in the blue responsibilities of the police departments, we see they're very similar until it comes to court security and jail operations. There is a huge amount of variance in the responsibilities there. Some difference in search and rescue operations as well, but as far as routine patrol and responding to calls for service, the patrol response responsibilities are very, very similar, as well as the traffic law enforcement and crime investigation responsibilities. Up another level to state police agencies, including highway patrols. The state police or the highway patrols are the most visible state law enforcement agency. Historically, state police agencies were created for 4 reasons: to assist local police, to investigate criminal activities that cross jurisdictional boundaries, to provide law enforcement in rural and other areas. It did not have local or county police agencies, and to break strikes and to control labor movements. And when we look at the makeup of state police versus highway patrols, state police have 23 agencies, statewide jurisdiction, and a variety of law enforcement tasks. We look at highway patrols, we see 26 agencies, and the jurisdiction for highway patrol agencies is limited to traffic laws and investigation of traffic accidents. Many states have additional what we call limited purpose law enforcement agencies, including alcohol beverage control commissions. A student in our class this semester works for TABC. That's an example of a limited purpose law enforcement agency. Also, fish and game wardens, narcotic agencies, etc. are examples of special limited purpose law enforcement agencies. Then we get to the federal law enforcement agency side. They're just a small percentage of the overall number of our nation's law enforcement officers and departments, but they have a substantial amount of influence. These federal agencies are authorized to enforce specific laws and attend to specific situations. And back in 2003, the most far-reaching reorganization of the federal government since World War II took place in 2002 and 3 with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. And we have other of your classmates who work for the TSA and other agencies that came about as a result of this reshuffling more than 10 years ago now. The Department of Homeland Security includes the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as the U.S. Secret Service. The beloved IRS is a part of the Department of the Treasury. And then the oversight agency for federal law enforcement, and in fact all of law enforcement in America, is the U.S. Department of Justice. The U.S. Department of Justice includes the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, the DEA, as well as BATFE, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Once again, this graphic demonstrates some of the responsibilities of federal law enforcement agencies. So moving forward here, we'll end our presentation on history at this point, at this slide, asking the question, considering the history of policing and other agencies in the criminal justice field, how do we achieve the organization's purpose with so many different people and opinions and attitudes and distractions and challenges and agendas with such a broad and diverse history as what we have discussed just in the last few minutes, but certainly is worthy of discussing for several hours, if not the remainder of the semester. How do we achieve the organization's purpose with so many different people and opinions and attitudes and distractions and challenges and agendas? Our discussion of organization theory will seek to answer this question. If after reviewing this video or this presentation you have any questions, please email any questions to me. You have my email address at theron.bowman@uta.edu. Please email me with any questions or observations you may have. Thank you for taking the time to review this presentation.